Do you guys want to know something incredibly petty about me? I can't stand people who like everything. I know, shocker. Take one look at my channel and I just give off angry gremlin energy. Is he garbage? They hate minorities? Wait, he's Batman? But I genuinely cannot fathom the idea of mindlessly consuming media with no perspective or nothing really to say except it was good. And I'm not talking about people who can't really articulate why they think the way they do, I'm talking about people who don't think at all. People whose love and passion for a series is nothing more than a thinly veiled version of brand loyalty, whether the brand is their favorite series or the brand of self-labeling as an enjoyer. The reason why these lesser beings tend to bother me isn't because I dislike the things they like. Okay, that's part of it, but no, my main reason is because overly positive people absolutely poison the well of media literacy and media discussions, especially when it comes to critique. Whether it be YouTube, Twitter, literally anywhere online, you can never really state an opinion that's even slightly negative, even if it's coming from a place of caring for the quality of a series, because these people will talk over you or dogpile you while saying things like, well, if you don't like it, then maybe you just didn't get it. What's ironic is that, well, they themselves don't get it. Not really. Ask these people why they like what they like, and I bet you their reasons come from a thread they thought was cool, or some other place in the gray ether. Their way of thinking, their taste in media is entirely regurgitated. As in, when someone says a piece of work is smart because it uses philosophy, religion, or culture as a crutch, then, well, it must obviously be true. Which is why a lot of the videos and threads on the series that these people tend to love are more often just recaps of the plot, or someone making up a bunch of stuff about a series just so that they can seem smart to their audience. The time period is around 2020 to 2025. Have you guys ever heard of dark shounen? Yeah, it and soft seinen were interchangeable terms that were loosely thrown around to describe shounen that are more than your typical happy-go-lucky coming-of-age plot, and about serious things like humans becoming monsters and monsters becoming humans. Basically, it's a shorthand for people who like the big three seinen to explain why stories like JJK entertain their monkey brain so much. I've talked about why certain MHA fans like MHA, this is why JJK fans like JJK. It's very similar to Hunter x Hunter in writing style and maybe lean into more seinen tropes. In addition, cards on the table, these types of stories obviously make reference to real-life philosophy, culture, religion, and literature, like there's no denying that. In fact, there's a sort of starter pack when it comes to analyzing stories like JJK and series with similar tones and ideas. Back in the day, you kinda had to know a thing or two about European philosophy and Eastern religion. If I had to summarize the similarities between Buddhism and someone like Nietzsche, and I don't care if I'm not saying his name correctly because I feel stupid for even talking about it, it would be the idea of self-idealization, the concept of finding your true self and accepting that self whatever means necessary. Becoming who you should be, separated from the very things that either hold you back, or the material things and relationships that keep you too tethered to the physical world. In Nietzsche's case, it comes through the form of being unshackled from shame. In most Eastern religions, it comes in the form of enlightenment, being so stripped of desires and insecurity that your entire spiritual essence is at peace. If all this seems silly to you, that's mostly because some of it is. Not only because these are black and white comic books made for children, not only because whether it be Kubo literally admitting to making most things on the spot as he goes, Gege admitting his story was a lot more shallow than he intended, not only because trying to fit a multi-chapter Japanese story within the confines of a singular ideology made by a German is a little ridiculous given Japan's very in-a-bubble-esque culture, but none of this really matters, does it? Sure, it's fun to pick apart a story, it's fun to analyze symbolism and break down how pieces of literature reflect the beliefs we as a society have grown to appreciate over thousands of years. But if your story sucks, symbolism and parallels to real-world ideologies can only do so much. You can make all the allusions to the Bible or ancient Roman texts you want, but if your Superman is joyless, reckless, and boring, then no amount of deep subtext is gonna make people like him. It might make him better than the Superman written by James Gunn, but that's kind of a given, isn't it?
Postmodernism does not like whatever is typically accepted. If you asked a postmodernist, they would say that the notion of something being typically accepted is the very limitation that modernism should have rebelled against.
JJK very blatantly rips apart the characteristic fabric of the very magazine that it is serialized in. In fact, we were treated to a time skip immediately after Gojo was unsealed, a decision that didn't sit right with many readers, but that I personally like for several reasons. For one, it obviously aligns with JJK's postmodern writing style. Secondly, it makes perfect sense that Gojo, the living weapon of the Jujutsu Society, wouldn't be allowed any downtime and moments of connection with others by the narrative. He's thrust into battle immediately after his return. It's a brilliant meta layer to Gojo and his burden in the story.
Of course, the act of consumption is very much subjective, but these are kind of the universal benchmarks I've found that people tend to agree make a good story. Does the plot make any sense? And are there any holes? Are the characters three-dimensional? And is the primary message followed up on and executed in a meaningful way? As we'll discuss, a lot of the pseudo-intellectual industry darlings immediately fall apart under this microscope. And as stated, if your writing isn't even that good aside from the subtext, then there's no way in hell that subtext can save it. Jujutsu Kaisen has a very bad character problem. The development of the cast is constantly sacrificed in favor of the next plot point. And that doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing, plot-driven stories exist, but the characters themselves are conduits for what the series tries to say. The idea of a meaningless death, the danger of not having a purpose, and the way a cycle and inconsistent morality system can create the very negative emotions we fight every day. All of this is dropped for a battle royale and a gauntlet that ends up being a lot more soulless than it could have been. Plot points revolving around revenge in someone like Sukuna, family with the Sennen twins and Fushiguro siblings, and the hundreds of other clans the story just forgot or didn't want to touch on. Not to mention the lore the series could have taken advantage of too. In order to get to the next fight, the story has to either drop or not allow these themes to fully flourish. Hopefully I can talk more about this when season 3 drops, because unfortunately the anime is so good that anime onlys probably think I'm lying, but that's nothing new because manga readers also think I'm lying and they read Hakari vs. Kashimo.
Remind yourself daily that there is no way to happiness, rather happiness is the way. And the way being Wu Wei, as in the present moment, flowing with life.
You taking a quote from is that from Attack on Titan?
No, that's from
No,
Taoism.
I don't.
You have a very westernized idea of freedom where it's very much how external factors impact you and removing external factors. Is that correct?
In a way, I don't think AOT forgot its central thesis. I think it exaggerated it to the point of it being unrecognizable. Like, I don't think anyone is denying the series is about being trapped physically, mentally, and even culturally within an environment that stifles growth, and then later in an environment that thrives off of prejudice. But I think in its journey to explore how someone can become so reactionary in response to internment, the story goes out of left field with its themes and the plot becomes very goofy. Ethnic cleansing, martyrdom, time travel mechanics. I don't think a story like AOT needed any of this to get its point across, especially when, as a result, it forsakes the very characters that made AOT and its dark, ever-expansive world and captivating mystery so special. It goes from a story about making your own version of freedom to a story about freedom coming at the cost of personal, relational, and racial identity.
It's pretty obvious that the opinion on Bleach's writing and quality is, generally speaking, rather low. The irony of these statements is that in actuality, Bleach is so nuanced and complex in its writing that it often goes over the heads of people who would claim this. Rather than these criticisms meaning that the series of Bleach is something that has no depth beyond a surface level, what this truly reveals is that they lack the ability or desire to understand the symbolism and prevalent themes within this manga.
Bleach is a critic's worst nightmare. Part of the reason why is because of those disgusting, insufferable enjoyers. There are people who are wholesome little uwu babies who just want to go through life peacefully while engaging with all media under a positive light. Pathetic. But there's a different side of enjoyers, kind of tangential to pseudo-intellectuals. the meatheads. These guys are the bane of my existence. They have such a bias towards things that look cool that trying to engage with them about the quality of a series, or trying to have a conversation at all, is kind of impossible. And again, I must emphasize there's nothing wrong with not wanting to like deep a series or something. If you like big swords and deep ink on a page, I'd rather you just say that than make yourself out to be smarter than anyone else. But again, I reiterate that enjoyers pollute media discussions because, in the case of Bleach, these people not only grew up with the series, but Bleach has such an astronomical cool factor that it can't possibly be bad, and as per usual, something being cool isn't enough. It has to be deep, it has to be deconstructive, it has to be implicit. Long gone are the days when Bleach was the little bro of the big three. Long gone are the days that Bleach fumbling its last arc and declining in sales wasn't up for debate. Now people's mouths are left agape because how can something be this cool but be so ass? It's impossible. What's worse is that the responsibility is on me, right? I'm going against the grain. I'm the one who's supposed to tell you the ultra-radical magnum opus of Period is actually garbage. But it's really hard, because trying to describe what makes Bleach bad is like trying to pick up all the coins you dropped out of your pocket while you're trying to impress a girl, right? Like, you think you got all of them and the embarrassment is over, but some of them rolled away and you accidentally picked up a piece of gum instead. In my eyes, there's so much wrong about Bleach, and not all of it is easy to pinpoint or articulate, because the series is so long and so dense and about so many things that trying to describe how one thing falls apart for you leads into how other parts falter. And those other parts are part of the slogfest that you low-key forgot, because besides having a billion subplots, Bleach is often so boring and uninteresting with its long list of characters, most with arcs that go nowhere of note, an antagonist that represents the 1000th form of death that you don't really care to understand because there's so many other shit villains you have to analyze. Like, okay, at first, I cared about the concept of a Quincy. At first, I was excited for their return, and at first, I even empathized with them because I was so tired of the story acting like Soul Society's fascism was just a normal thing I was supposed to accept, regardless of the fact that they're supposed to be a safe haven for dead souls, that anyone, literally anyone opposing them in any way, was refreshing. But as soon as the story developed most of them in shallow ways, giving them quote-unquote distinct and humorous archetypical personalities, the moment Bleach introduced a dimension in history for the Quincy's that once again doesn't really go anywhere, the moment the story makes them Nazi Jews, and the moment Bleach made all of that null by skipping their boss's last fight anyway, I was tapped out. Bleach has so much to say, so many things it wants to do with its storyline that every arc, every saga feels fundamentally different from the last. Entire cast members and themes just get dropped, and it doesn't help that the dialogue is so bad. Everyone is always yelling or arguing or insulting each other or just spouting fake deep dialogue about how life is meaningless and darkness is inevitable, and oh my goodness. If it weren't for the bloated and inflated chest sizes of some of these characters, I would be able to tell them apart! And no, seriously, does Kubo think this is attractive? The very power system that the series tries to develop through the Soul Reapers is repeatedly either dropped for something like Fullbring or made null due to contrivances that allow the characters to get out of their current predicaments, like in Thousand Year Blood War with everyone's manufactured bankais. This goes for villains too. There's always some Inspector Gadget bullshit that I'm just supposed to accept happens and not question any of it. The antagonists repeatedly change as well. Hollows at first are just souls not prepared to move on from the central plane of existence, but then they're given their own reality, their own culture, their own version of death. They grow to be Arankars, they poison Soul Reapers, except when they don't. They're thoughtless monsters who can form relationships, ideologies, and become the antithesis of someone else's character arc. Soul Society itself also makes no sense. Like, it's rife with poverty, oppression, and classism, and none of this is really, like, addressed. The story ignores that its very premise, Ichigo being the pillar and strength for those who can't fight for themselves as a way of coping with his own loss, falls apart the moment that it establishes that those in power of the afterlife are terrorists, and he's just not gonna do anything about it. Aizen wants to do something about it, but most of his screen time is spent slicking back his hair and predicting everything. And Yuha is more mad that Soul Society has gone soft rather than anything, more criminal about them. Meanwhile, Ichigo is finding himself for the 5th time. Rukia is simping for her abusive brother who never even apologized. Or he may miss the women's suffrage class and thinks she's just an object for Ichigo. Chad has been forgotten, and Ishida is busy writing Chojin X. I'm insecure about my videos. Can I admit that? I'm scared that I didn't tackle a topic well enough or that I misspoke when it came to an analysis or critique I posed. But Bleach is genuinely such a draining and confusing read with such drastic dips in quality, tone, writing style, characters, themes, that at this point, forget it, man. I can't de-Bleach. It's too much. I mean, you ask 7 different Bleach fans what the moon means, and you might get 7 different answers. Of course, Radman and his unemployed alumni have the time to be better equipped to take Bleach for what it is. They have a genuine passion for the series, which I don't, but also most of their threads and videos are just recaps of the plot. If they forget something, they can just go back to one of their 12-hour videos and watch it for a fact check. But you want to know what's really crazy about that? Even they have to ignore parts of this confusing 700 chapter story for a certain section to make sense.
I'm more than aware that later contexts from the 1000-Year Blood War reshape the way we see and understand Zangetsu, but for the purpose of this video, I will be focusing solely on the first 420 chapters of the series.
Bleach itself doesn't know what it is. It doesn't know what it wants to be. So why the hell have I been forcing myself to make sense of it across like 5 videos? Why have I been trying to accurately articulate why I dislike the series so much to people who are frankly brainwashed? I mean, it's not like everything I dislike about Bleach can literally just change the next arc, so frankly, it's not productive. Now, trust me, I know some of my Bleach takes can be a little hard to digest, but don't worry, I have the best, the most credible cosign you could ever imagine. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the biggest One Piece fan, the biggest Bleach fan of all time, Radman Yahoo.
I've been saying Bleach is built like a FromSoft game, from the lore to the approach to boss fights and how it handles power creep as the story game progresses. What is this nigga talking about?
You know, it's funny because FromSoft is often criticized to just make the same game over and over again. I don't know if he knows that.
Not gonna lie, I wish Kubo spelled out some more lore and just gave us some blatant exposition here and there, because holy shit, I'm getting tired of having to dig like a mother effer just to understand some basic elements of the lore. Is he being sarcastic here, or is he like actually waking up from the genjutsu here?
I know, right? Like, damn, tell us how you really feel, Reddington.
Imagine Bleach if Kubo was actually good at plotting. Might have been. I don't have a single female character in my top 50, and I don't care what the fuck you niggas have to say about it. Oh my god, bro. Bro, the misogyny is rooted, bro. It's rooted in generations, bro. The generational misogyny, man. Wait. What does this have to do with your video, though? Because I know what video you're working on for this. Nigga, what does this have to do?
Oh, nothing in the slightest. I just think this one is funny. So remember, if you're a Bleach fan and you're typing up a hate comment or a hate tweet, just know that your Hive leader agrees with me. And if he's not your Hive leader, please point me in his direction so I can make fun of him too. Thanks. While this was all going on, there was a war on Anna Twitter. It might be worse than the war that we are going to fight for Mr. Trump.
We? Now we going to war. What do you mean we? Nintendo? No.
At the center of it was Jujutsu Kaisen and My Hero Academia, 2 brand new pillars of shonen with fandoms fighting amongst themselves to prove who's superior. You can probably guess what side I ended up on. Regrettably. Regardless, at the core of this battle was the idea of intelligence versus lack thereof. The thinking that if you had any problems with Jujutsu Kaisen, they resulted from a lack of truly understanding the story, because if you did, then obviously you wouldn't have the problems you do, right? This was annoying to say the least. The idea that you can't dislike something without passionately picking apart its particles is pure madness, especially when these people can never do the same for things they like, as we've discussed. Of course, media literacy quality is at an all-time low. You can have bad faith or biased reasons for disliking something, and of course analyzing a piece of work does often create the most valuable and productive form of hatred. Just look at me. However, if you're at all like me, a sane human being, and ironically unlike those same fans who do have an allegiance or bias, you weren't an MHA fan just wanting to hate on the competition. You loved MHA because it gave you something a story like JJK failed to give time and time again. A story that truly cared for the characters. My Hero Academia took the time to make sure the cast was treated like actual human beings, people that you personally got acquainted with, as opposed to a story like JJK that made the cast feel more like plot devices than anything else. All that mattered was that MHA's story resonated, because Jujutsu Kaisen was never really concerned about resonating with anybody. And when it was all said and done, by the end, even the author agreed with that sentiment. This is why I can't help but roll my eyes when these pseudo-intellectual industry darlings are brought up as stories that are profound. These stories skip over the complexities of the characters for some sort of efficient writing style. We don't know how they got to the conclusions they got to, they just get to them. Jujutsu Kaisen specifically isn't deep because of its allusions to Buddhism, or its references to its influences, because it never commits to exploring any of these things in a meaningful way, ways that would make it matter more than just a simple aesthetic. Also, the author's literal name means, "my story is a sack of shit." He's aware of his own flaws as an author, and if Gege himself writes a chapter about how nonsensical the final arc was, I really don't see how there's room for debate on this topic. Bleach at this point might be beyond my patience, but I could rebuttal these r/deep Jujutsu Kaisen videos for hours. But not only am I a lazy piece of shit who's tired of only being able to work with manga panels and season 2 footage.
No, I'm done. You done? I'm done wasting time. I'm about to get started. Oh, you done wasting time.
My annoyance with how people treat art like it's a philosophy 101 assignment has been well documented. I'm just choosing to be a little more direct for my new baby review series.
It's not about him. It's not about him. Ah, for Christ's sake, say his name! Say his name, you coward! Say his name!
Furthermore, not only do I think people generally look at things too deeply, I just think they're wrong. These stories might be about the self and becoming one with who you really are on the spiritual level, but if you actually read these stories, their ideas of valuing the self are rather contradictory. True enlightenment does not come from avoiding conformity and embracing some sort of individuality. I know, on this channel, I've harped on it enough, but it's still crazy how the central premise of Bleach, exploring death and giving those who experience or are afraid of it some sort of peace, is almost immediately dropped as Ichigo defends the very people who are the very thing he swears to protect others from. Yuji might assert a positive meaning behind the concept of being a cog, knowing that everyone has their roles, but at the end of the day, he's still a cog, being nothing more than a machine that just fights spirits for the rest of his life, along with all of his friends. Eren might value his freedom, but that freedom comes through the genocide of others. For stories about finding your own independence, it makes damn sure that independence doesn't come at the cost of societal harmony. These characters do try to fight against systems that limit freedom, but it seems like those systems won anyway.
So you expect people to speak out every time something negative is said, otherwise they're a part of it?
That is what being complicit is in something.
So
Just say, yo, like, yo.
The time period is the late 2000s to the early 2010s. I was not a part of the anime fandom during that time, my attention was spent elsewhere, but I saw it from afar, when kids did Naruto runs at school, when power scaling Goku against your classmate's favorite character was a common recess pastime, when Linkin Park was placed over Bleach AMVs, when you couldn't escape One Piece fan art. What a time to be alive, right? When you've been terminally online as long as I have, you grow to notice patterns. The shippers will always be toxic, the power scalers will always be wrong, and the theory crafters will always be in over their heads. And as bad as the My Hero fanbase was to me, at the end of the day, they were a fandom. They do what fandoms do, and I've learned that no matter what, that culture, that language will follow me everywhere on the internet. For better or worse, it's normal. The era of pseudo-intellectuals was abnormal. There will always be people who will overthink and reach when it comes to their analysis, but a collective of right-winged Eastern-obsessed Brits who apply ancient philosophy to text is something new. And excuse me for being dramatic, but it was damn near an invasion of fandom spaces. And you could tell. Sure, some of them still honest to God appreciate the medium, but a lot of them just left. They saw the stories they liked sucked and jumped ship, leaving nothing behind but online trauma, for me at least. You might be asking why I'm covering something like this in big 2025, but it's because I'm pissed off, man. It's not fair. Why must I be forced to move on to other things and maybe better things when my experience with these individuals still lingers on my mind, given just how difficult all of it was? In my experiences, they belittled the intelligence of those around them, coded their malice and nonchalance so you could look like the crazy one, invaded group chats and judged you for not liking the same things they did, avoided discussions with you entirely based on the fact they thought you didn't get it, and while they were at it, they belittled and embarrassed the way you chose to express yourself on the internet in front of all of their friends. And we're supposed to pretend these conservative chuckle fucks didn't colonize the way people talked about a medium that I loved for so long.
YBG Don from DC.
What's your name?
I don't care if you think a story is deep, or how deep it is, or how deep you're willing to go in justifying how deep you've made it. In the same way that I think lolly culture and eroticism has suffocated the culture of anime and refuses to go away even during the hiatuses of ReZero, this fascination with making everything implicit and subtextual suffocates the very magic these stories try to create. These are not intellectual think pieces. This medium is not literature homework. This is art. And by condemning those who don't see that art the same way you do, you are terraforming a community that, to put it frankly, you don't belong in. You are giving meaning to things without it. You are giving bad stories justification for being bad. You're diluting the validity of valid criticism. And it's 2025, and you're still doing it. The irritation of people giving poorly written decisions grace because of philosophy or a religious undertone. The distance I felt from friends who could barely hold a conversation with me sometimes because I didn't feel the way about these stories they did. The embarrassment of being lumped in with those who don't understand the story and just use it as an opportunity for slander, when my criticism has always come from a place of actually caring and trying to meet an author halfway. The disrespect from those who thought they were mentally and politically better than me. The exhaustion that made my victory in the long run not even properly register, and the second guessing that led me to believe I'm everything these people think of me. Even if the concept of deeping something to this level intrigued me, how am I supposed to do that under these conditions? The time period is 2025, and the era of these people is kinda over. And I'm hoping now that online discourse can go back to normal, maybe with a better sense of inclusivity, weirdos with a pure passion for a medium they love, and shounen that perfectly back up where that passion comes from. A community not full of IQ measuring contests, but people who are brought together because of the stories that they love to discuss. A community that no longer has any need for ego or faux intelligence. A community that maybe you don't see eye to eye with, but you can still come out of those disagreements in one piece. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Shounen Reclaim Show.